Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Sticky Live. You'll notice that we got much better looking folks on tonight. Peyton is here with me. She's checking out the studio, but I also think she's got a huge interest in what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the difference between a ball diff, a gear diff, and this brand new box that we got this week from Canada called the G-Force Digital Digitizer, and it is awesome. I'm going to show you guys what that means. But before we do that, Mr. Steve, welcome to the show. Somebody post up that you can hear me because I am known for not getting the audio right. And we will get going. A couple of things. Hey, I wanted to say an appreciation to everybody that joined us on Monday. That was one of our biggest shows ever. And just an amazing group. If you haven't joined us, what we do on Monday at 8:30 is Sticky Icky Classics, and this week we went over the Reflex / Titan with Mr. Jim Pullman, and I've got to confirm it out, but I believe we're going to have the NASCAR crew chief legend Danny Stockman join us. So back-to-back crew chiefs from NASCAR. I'm going to get with Danny, double check he's going to be on. He's going to be showing his Woods Pan car, which was one of the coolest cars ever made. So if you haven't watched that show, then it's a good time to start watching it next week because we're going to have a real star on. And this show, if you haven't watched it before, what this show does, it covers some more of the technical aspects. And so one of the things that we've talked about on and off, and actually we started this a few months ago, we began to talk about the merits between a ball diff, a gear diff. And one of the challenges that folks have with gear diffs and ball diffs is getting them set the same way every time. And that is what this little black box will help us do. But before we do that, let's switch over and talk about our the theory behind some of this stuff. So here's kind of how it works. In our world of RC, basically we're going to have a live axle across the back of a car with a couple of wheels on it. And you're like, wait, there's not a single axle. Well, let's kind of hang with this for a second. So if you have a single axle, that means both wheels rotate at the same speed. Now, you can play around a little bit of a game here and say, well, I'm going to make the outside size bigger and smaller and play with stagger. And then when you go around a curve, this wheel will move at a different rate than the outside tire. Absolutely true. Now, we covered that, and if you haven't seen that theory, then it's a great time to really kind of dive into that a couple of shows back, because we'll get into rotating and speed and all that. But today we're going to talk about, if we think about pan cars, what we do is we put a gear right here, obviously a motor right here, and a pinion right here. And if this is fixed like they're doing in the carpet stuff these days, then again, everything rotates at the same piece. But assuming that we don't affix that, what we have is a gear, and then we put a plate on each side of that gear, and we put some balls in here. And what that does, it allows slippage. So the entire piece rotates of the gear, the diffs, the axle, the tires. It rotates in a counter direction to what the pinion is doing, and what that allows us to do is get drive forward. Now, the tension that is put on these balls is a very important thing. So let me clear out of this, and we'll dive into it a little more. So the way that works then, if we think about it, in a off-road or dirt oval, is we have this little piece here, and then on the opposite side we have the same piece. It goes in similar to this, and then we're going to have a gear. And then that's going to lock in on some pins, or on some, we'll make it really simple, and we'll avoid a couple of pieces of componentry. But basically then we've got balls here. Whoops, I changed it over to erase for some reason. A ball here, and a ball here that's popped into the gear. Now there would be more all the way around. So your gear, and you got balls like that, right? And a hole in the center. Now we're going to put a bearing here. All that does is it allows for when we're spinning all of these pieces that the gear doesn't get hot. And then we're going to put a bearing here, so when these shove together, we get really smooth action. And then, of course, you've got the screw that comes down through this guy and goes into here with a nut and a spring. Oops, a spring and a nut. It's the problem with drawing backwards, boys. So you get the idea of the mechanism. Now, what happens then when these are all clamped together, and I got to be a little more precise in my drawing, which is hard to do, is the ball will actually stick out past the gear. Now, this is extreme, right? But so the gear's here, and the balls sit here. So what happens is those diff rings ride on the ends of those balls. So if you're doing it right, and you got a really super smooth diff, the diff rings never touch the gear. Now, it can shuck back and forth, and you will get contact. That's just the cost of living in 3D. But if you're doing it right and everything's tracking good and you got a good round gear, you're going to get contact here, contact here, contact here, contact here, all the way around. Each ball is going to touch. Now, what that means is when this whole thing, this whole assembly is driving, it's going to turn both sides. So both sides are going to be turning. It's going to be rotating around. And so it's going to be boom, 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 boom. When one wheel either loses traction or you're going around the corner and now we're pinching one wheel off so it can't rotate as much, you're going to actually bark this diff. What's going to happen is this side will start rotating at a different rate than this side. And that's what those balls are doing, is they're allowing for that rotation to occur. I think everybody's with me. If you're not, put something up on. Oh, that's awesome, Ethan. I appreciate that. We love fifth scale. It's absolutely an awesome. I'll switch back to this camera for a second. Absolutely love the fifth scale stuff. We've got a really good prep for that, and I think this week we're putting it in bigger bottles. So if you guys are buying the 4-ounce stuff for fifth scale, you can get it in, I think, 8-ounce bottles, and I think there's a 12-ounce bottle. I'll have to get back. Keep checking the website, and we'll do that. But I appreciate that. Wendell, I drew that shit. And it's pretty solid drawing. So let me go back to the internet faster than Corn's country. Yeah, but I bet he's never had like 2 feeds go out on him like I have. But and I didn't watch it. So did he announce something tonight? I'm hoping he announced a summer race, but I didn't watch. I saw Ashley and him while I was getting around. We're talking. So somebody post up if he said anything. I'd love for another race up there. So back to what we're talking about. Let me create a new sketch. Discard this one because Wendell said it was ugly. So that's how a ball diff works. A gear diff, slightly different animal. What we're going to have is, and notice I'm starting at a different angle. You've got a rod that goes through, and on it, it has these odd-shaped gears. And then those odd-shaped gears tie out to these gears. And what happens is when they all touch, this gear and this gear and this gear and this gear, these act as the ball bearings, as we just talked about. So these allow these 2 gears to go at a different rate. These go out to our pins, out to our CVD, out to our pins, out to our CVDs. And so this all goes in a case. It's a big old case. It's got a gear on the end. Oops. That's why Wendell says it looks like a mess, because it is. And then we screw the gear on. So what happens is this gear and this case rotate. And that rotation then is always going. And the gears inside of it, unlike on a ball diff, so when I was rotating my gear before, I had my balls, and now I've got to get everything to rotate, including the balls and everything. This can't not rotate, because what I'm doing is I'm driving it off of the screws to the case. So this 100% will rotate whether it likes it or not. And these gears now are determining the speed going out to the CVDs. So where it works really well, and the difference between a gear diff and a ball diff, and you see this in off-road where you've got really good traction, you can lay it down. In theory, you could get more drive out of a gear diff, and you will get less drive because you can have slippage between the balls and the plates that we don't have here, because we will drive this forward. And that's why it doesn't work where you get to really low traction situations. You could overdrive one tire, and that's going to make the car kind of either go bound, or it's going to want to dart in one of the directions, because it's going to drive. Physics are physics. And the ball diff's going to be smoother, and it's going to allow things to do. The other piece of that is a ball diff, then I can adjust how tight these are by the screw. So I unscrew this a little bit, and I can get where this gear will slip going forward, which is going to take away some drive, which will let the wheels gain more traction. I can set it a little bit tighter, and then it comes down to that. So in theories, this is how these two work. So where you've got super high bite situations with a ball diff, you're just going to crank this down fairly hard. And what's going to happen is it's going to crush these bearings, these ball bearings, and then we're going to get better rotation. I'm going to loosen it up, and it's going to do that. Here, we don't have the same tuning options. Now, that's where, let me clear the space out for you guys. That's where our friends Diff Lube comes in. Now, what's going to happen is you get this progression. You've got light, and you got thick. Now, this is going to be measured by viscosity, and essentially the lightest that you're going to have in here is you're going to have oil-based or oil-looking. So you're going to have super light oils, and up here we're going to have essentially, lubricants. So that can get very tacky. And in the middle, you're going to see measures. Now, that measure is based off of the viscosity, and so that can be, say, 1,000 to 9,000. There's about 1 million different combinations, but most diff lubes run that way. Now, if you're watching this and you run 8th scale, you run 5th scale, you're going to say, well, I got 20,000. You do. You've got a bunch of challenges up here. I think they make 200,000. They make Play-Doh. They make a plastic locker. You got a whole bunch of options up here at the top, right? I agree. But for the most part, we're going to operate in a range kind of around this. Now, when we think about the ball diffs, you can go up into this. In fact, you'll change over and you'll use more of the thicker lubricants versus a diff oil. And so what you're going to use is like the associated, I hate when it goes to a race mode. You're going to go to the associated silicone grease, which is going to be up in this range, right? But it breaks down. But it's the standard, in my opinion. It's one of the things that you can count on in the RC industry. It's been around for 30 some years, and a preference there. There's a few other folks that make some thicker ones and thinner ones, but basically, ball diffs, you're almost always going to be on the AE silicone. And then what you're going to do, if you and we built this a long time ago. If you guys missed it, go back, watch that video. Got 12 balls in here. I'm not going to count them. Just trust that that's 12. You're going to put a dop on that. Too much, it's just going to fling off. Centrifugal force is not your friend on a ball diff. What you want to do is make sure that the ball is properly coated, because you don't want friction. That's what leads to hot diff. Hot diffs equal inefficient diffs. Inefficient diffs equal loss of speed. And the other thing it's going to do, if it's got too much, it's going to attract dirt. So you've got some options. You can put a ring around here. I think Robinson or Kimbrough makes them. Maybe which one? You can clip that on, keep some out of it, but a little bit more maintenance around that. You've got to keep it clean. But that's kind of the ball diff. The gear diff, you're going to operate. Some guys down here like light oil. I've seen just about anything you can imagine used in that range. And then the thinner the oil, what's going to allow is the freer the spin. And this is going to be the slower spin. And why that's important, so that's going to determine the amount of drive that you have. Again, what you're doing is you can get, and this is the thing that I think a lot of folks don't always go around. They're like, hey, a ball diff, I can set super light. Yeah, I can build a gear diff with super light oil, maybe no oil, and we can get where that is basically free too. So don't think that there's a difference between a ball diff and a gear diff on the bottom, because if you set the ball diff looser than you can get a gear diff most of the time, you're going to slip the gear, which is going to inhibit forward drive. And so you really have the same operating ranges. The thing that you can do with both, lock them out at the top. You have fewer tuning options on the thicker end of the range because you could pack full a gear diff full of volume. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But that's really, again, that's really some of the pieces. So one of the challenges that comes from this, and the most important thing on a diff is consistency. Our pen keeps stop writing because I hit my little fat hand on the button. So consistency, and what that means is diff after diff after diff, I want them the same. So if I have diff 1 and the car is handling really good, and then all of a sudden I'm like, all right, I'm going to build it, and it essentially becomes diff 2. I want to make sure that each of these have the same rotation. So these should equal each other. If they don't, it could change, and most likely does, whether it's noticeable or not, will change how the car goes through the corner, either on exit or either on entrance or exit, depending on what you did. If you built it a little bit tighter, you'd build it a little bit softer. If it's not consistent, so when you're doing a diff, it's super important to understand exactly, hey, here is how I build my diffs. And if you watch some of the real experts that do racing, you're going to watch and they build the exact same diff with the same process every single time that they're trying to get them to match. Or when they make an adjustment, they know what that adjustment does. So consistently building them the same way. Now, how you do that is it can be everything from take it apart, clean it, sand the diff rings, put the balls in, use the same ball grade. Very little variability between balls. So if you're using G10 silicone, G10 ceramic, or if you're using stainless, whichever one you're using, use the same grade. That's really the only change, which is the porosity and the polish that's on the ball. And that's going to adjust it. So the higher the grade ball, the smoother the diff's going to be. Diff rings need to be sanded and polished. You get the idea. And then the same amount of diff lube on each one of those. If you're building a gear diff, the easiest way to do that is you take your little diff. It's got your build here, and you got your all your stuff here, and you're ready to rock and roll on the half. And then in here you got your little gears and your little other gear like this, and put this on your scales. Everybody should have a scale of some sort that can read down into grams or tenths of ounces. And then if you're pouring fluid, you pour it into the same weight so that every time the diff weighs exactly the same. That will tell you that you should have pretty close to the same rotation into this. Now, that's a pretty good practice. And then what you'll do is you'll finish assembling it out, and you're like, well, hey, if I don't fill this full of fluid, then what's another way of handling that? It's exactly the same as a It's exactly the same as a ball diff, is that you're going to need to build it with the same amount of if you're using a silicone, if you're using chain oil, if you're using spit, whatever it is that you're putting into that thing, put it on in the same way. So if you can't get it where you're weighing it, so say 1,000 to 9,000 that you're filling the diff, go by weights. Otherwise, you're just going to have to match it in the same way. And you're like, man, that's really hard to do. How do I get that consistency every time? So let me do this before we switch over to camera. Let's see what we got. Remember when ceramic balls came out? Sadly, can you remember when, and I'm trying to think, was it Buds made ceramic diff rings that came in the little plastic case? They were white. So if you remember, I bet, Mark, I bet you do remember that. Let's see, Ethan, yep, so we talked about that a while back. So why are the gears on the diff called planet or planetary gears when false size gears, they're called spider gears? I can answer that for you. Planetary gears is the proper engineering name for them. Spider gears came out of Detroit, and I have no idea where they came from, but I will, I could look that up someday. But yeah, so planetary gears are what that cut is called if you use the engineering term. Spider gears are what we call in the automotive industry. That's why they call it that. And I bet it goes back to somebody like Henry Ford or something. Let's see, planetary gears are the same. No, I should have just read yours, Ethan. Let's see, why the name change? Because I think it's just an automotive thing. I don't know why they call it differently. How about no oil? That should be the lightest. Okay, Mike, I will challenge you on that. Let me go back to the board. So we clear these out, and let me throw this one at you. So on a ball diff, I got a gear or a ball, ring. So gear, ring, and you could calculate it out, but we're not going to get nerdy about this. But basically, I'm going to exert pressure in this direction with that screw. That's going to give me pressure on my contact points. So I take my ball quality, my polish on this, and I could get a friction coefficient, and that's going to be reduced by super light oil. And that's why actually really, really, really light oil, because of the friction coefficient, will be the lightest. Now you're going to argue back, hey, friction coefficient on a really tiny ball, yeah, but we're down in the immeasurable pieces of that. Same thing when you get to planetary gears, probably a little bit more. They need a lubricant in there, not and again, super like maybe a nye oil. If you wanted to go down that far, let it dry, get the friction coefficient down, then you probably have a pretty good case against me on that. The real question is, why can't we get carbon planetary gears? Like, why is nobody making this? Let's see. I remember the little plastic cups of different lubes. You know, I almost went, if this were Sticky Classics, I would have went over, got all of the little Trinity ones that you could get and showed those off. But it's, oh, see, I should have looked. That's why you're right. No oil equals short time for transmission. Yeah, it's that you don't realize. So there's a couple of things. One, you're using gears that are made out of really, I wouldn't say cheap plastic, but inexpensive, not heat. The plastic just doesn't like heat, and it expands. And so that's what you've really got the problem with on this. It's not as much here, but you're heating this ball up, and where it touches inside of that gear is going to gum up on you. And I'll do this. We actually did some of this testing a while ago. I forget what we were doing. It was like we're sitting at Cooper's, and we were talking about diffs, and we put one in a drill, and we ran it. We using different things, and then we're just hitting it with the heat gun, like super boring, like in between some pretty long rounds. And it is a measurable difference. You can actually get some heat to build up by doing that. And by the way, if you're doing that, just switch over to drinking. It's a much better sport than and doing crazy stuff like that. So let me, oh my goodness gracious, look at that. That thing is so out of focus, it's not even funny. So what I realized is I don't have a diff. Let me grab one real quick. All right, so what we're going to talk about, let me get my mic on so you guys can hear me. Trinity Purple. Don, you just threw that out there, brother. Yeah, that was, they made, it was like, I don't even know how to explain it, but that was thick. And it had like a little bit of a sparkle to it. So some interesting stuff there. So let me move the pen out of the way. Reese gets mad at me for sharing stuff that we do, but I think most folks know we love BMS cars. And so we run a lot of gear diffs in those cars. If you're not familiar with it, go to the website. We just started making some replacement parts for them. But it's a challenge to do that. Now, these aren't out of our cars, by the way. So Tommy Burgess is watching. You haven't gained anything, brother. What this does, and this is super cool, and it's actually an off-road thing right now. So what this is it's going to drive the diff. So if you look at that number, by itself, it's 0.0669. Golly, it's almost like if it gets to 666, we're gonna be like, oh, it's the devil's machine. No, oh, I just did it. All right, now what that does is then we can measure by shoving this in. I can measure what it's taken to drive this. So you can see now it is 0.103, 0.102, and some change. And so now, let me focus that in a little bit for you. Like, oh, maybe it's not going to be. It's got a weird screen on it. I think it's picking that up. So now what we can do is you can put that on a ball diff, which I'm not going to run out to the other building to grab, but you get the idea is that we can actually now get where we can match out the diffs. Let me put this one on here. It's an old diff here. I have no idea what's in it. And you can see this is a little bit thicker fluid. So it's actually running a 0.147. So what's it measuring? I don't know. I was going to check and see. I think it's in some weird measurement like newtons or something, but I gotta double check that. So don't hold me to it. If Pullman's watching, he's the one that turned me on to this thing. But I'm just going to tell you a couple of things that I know. One, you have a scale. Whether that scale is 1 to 1,000 or that scale is 1 to 10, wherever it reads, just get it to read the same thing. It doesn't much matter what it's reading in. Long story to tell you that I don't know what it's reading in, but I do know this. I've got a Spectrum. I've got it without anything on it. It ran 0.66, and it's got, I don't know what's over here, infinity. We'll say I could pinch it down, but I tried that earlier and it hurt like hell. So it's stronger than my pinky. And then in here, I've got a line that was 0.1. I don't know. You guys throw it up if you remember what it was at. It doesn't matter. 0.105. And then I had a second one that was 0.15. I happen to know that there is thicker oil here and thinner here. I also know if I fill it more, that acts as, so it could be filled more or less, right? And all I'm going to do is through your testing, it's the same as we've talked about, is every diff, if I come back and the car was like, really, oh, good night, we just erased the whole thing. Good. It's over now. And the car was really good. I'm going to write that number down on my setup sheet. So the next time we go back and the conditions are that same, or I'm going to build the same thing, I'm going to match out and I'm going to build to that number. And then what we'll do, we'll test above it and below it. And then that gives us a spectrum to run inside of. And then we'll just keep track of that. And then when we build diff over and over and over again, that will tell us we've got the right number. Where that saves you is on a ball diff. So ball diffs, so you rebuild them and you're like, I just rebuilt this diff. Is it going to be good for the main? Throwing it on that tool, getting that number gives you the absolute confidence that you're going to be able to get the car on the track and it's going to handle the same. And so it takes one more variable out. We don't get money from the Diff Digitizer G-Force guys. In fact, it took me forever to get one of these for the show. I think they're sold out at a lot of places. But the biggest part of this is it's an incredible tool for making sure that your diffs are matching up. If that's an important setup feature for you. If you're like, hey, I've got precision tuned fingers, then you got precision tuned fingers. Go ahead and knock yourself out with that. But again, just know the theory that thicker, more drive, it's going to want to make the car rotate a little bit more, drive off the corner a little harder. If you can get away with it. If you can't get away with it, just start going thinner and a little bit lighter and you'll be there. So is there a way to adapt that tool to check pan car? It actually, this has got 2 set screws in it. I didn't show it, Mike, but you take this off. There is an adapter that comes with this for pan cars. And I think what it did, it grabbed, if I remember right, it was grabbing the axle. I'll have to look at it again. If I didn't throw it away, I'll have to grab it again. But yes, you can do that. And what you do, pull one wheel off, hold the diff gear, and then you get it done. So what's the end of the cable? It's now this to me is a little silly, Tom. It's a USB, so it's a USB micro to I've got it plugged into just a USB charger off camera. So that's a little kooky. Let's see. Let's go back. Chinese plastic. Yeah, I disinfected it. It's fine. That diff is too stiff. Yeah, you know what? I cannot say if it is or not. We got this Friday, and we haven't tested anything against it. So might be. We'll find out. Let's see. All right. Any other comments? We are coming up. Actually, we have flown through the half-hour mark. So, wow, that was a fast. That was holy crap, that was a fast half hour. So, anybody else throw it up there? Oh, that didn't take long. Let's see. Where can you get that tool? A-Main sold out, but they do have it on the website, and they may be back in stock. I got this from a hobby shop out of Alberta, Canada, and had it sent to me. G-Force tools, they make, we're going to show another one of their tools when it comes in on springs. You can get them on eBay. You can get them a lot of places. That's the long story short. They're available, brand new. Just go to your favorite hobby shop site, and they probably have that, have it on there. And I think it was, don't quote me on this, I think it was $80, but it was like in Canadian, so it was like 2,000 pounds or Libra, whatever their Canadian loonies are. Let me see. Are you going to race the score race at Smoky Mountain? Absolutely, and we will be in pit spot number 3, and you'll be able to get everything you want Sticky Icky. So come by, get a T-shirt for the Stuck Like Good Tour 2020. Get some Sticky Icky. Also, we are sponsoring the lanyards this year, and that's a really cool program. What we're going to do is you'll have a lanyard that will allow you to practice during the score races, so we'll control the number of cars. But in the following race, there's a twist. All of the TQ winners will get a golden lanyard, and that golden lanyard will allow you to be the 8th person or the ninth person there. You get to be the +1. So if there's 8 people up there practicing, if you won TQ and you've got the golden lanyard, the golden, whatever that is, goes around your neck, lanyard, then you get to go up there and practice. So gives you something fun to go do. And it won't work. You can't have like 2 of you up there. There'll be some rules around that score will go through, but we're sponsoring that. I just think it's a really cool promotion and makes the TQ award worth something. So yes, Smoky Mountain's going to be a blast. The track was really good. Then not so good, then really good last year, and I bet they're going to skip the not so good part. Eddie Rowland and those guys are putting a ton of work into it, and I'm excited to return. And then, oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, bring the fifth scale by. And let's see. I use a gunsmith torque wrench for building my diff balls. Oh, I am. Oh, you should, Mr. Blackwell. I will bring you on the show. You can show that one when you're. I've never seen that trick done. I'd like to see it. And then let's see. I mean the diff analyzer. Yeah, you can. What was the question? What is the name of that tool? It is. How the heck do you rotate this thing around so Brian can see it? Good night. Well, I'll just read it. It's the G-Force Diff Digitizer Differential Torque Checker. Where the hell is the oh, wrong camera. So right there, brother. Get it close to my face because that's where it's at, right there. All right, boys. Again, really appreciate it. Big doubleheader. If you're in the Carolinas, the racing is on. The state is wide open for racing. The little toy cars. So Little Indy at 11 this weekend. And then Fountain Inn, bunch of us are doing the doubleheader. Then easily next weekend, and I think Little Dixie, but probably a bunch of people will be up in Tennessee preparing for the score race, which is going to be a throwdown. Eddie Rollins sent me a note saying all the pit stop outs are gone, I believe. So they'll figure out if you want to get there, but I think a lot of them are gone. So appreciate everybody. Let me see. Say that 5 times fast. I cannot do it, but I can do this. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.